Hi everybody, welcome to Dandelion Cottage and Watercolor Wednesday. I'm Leslie Watkins. Well, I've got the watercolor sketchbook out again. If you have been following me for a little while, you know that I go around the year painting some of the beautiful flowers and scenery from Dandelion Cottage. And so it's time to get caught up with that a little bit. And I thought that these roses would be the perfect subject. So here they are. They're absolutely beautiful. This is called Rosa Xanthina, and it was a shrub that one of my gardening clients no longer wanted. And so we dug it up and I plopped it into the ground here at Dandelion Cottage, and it has gone gangbusters. So if you'd like to see that shrub in the yard, there is a previous video that excuse me, that I did this morning that will show you how big it is and what it looks like. Also blooming now are forget-me-nots, and these forget-me-nots were given to me by my friend Hatsie, who is no longer with us, but she was absolutely wonderful, and she was an avid gardener, and she gave me some of her forget-me-nots, and they have self-seeded all around the gardens here at Dandelion Cottage, which is such a lovely reminder of my friend Hatsie. And that's one of the things that plants and gardens can do for you. I know there are lots of people out there that have plants that may have come from their grandmother's gardens. For instance, peonies are extremely long-lived and they transplant pretty well, and so you can have these memories in your garden, or maybe you planted a tree to commemorate a special event, or maybe you have a pet, a beloved pet that's buried someplace on your property and you want to put some flowers around it or a shrub. I've got several of those, and sadly I have a lot of pets that are here with me at Dandelion Cottage that have passed over the Rainbow Bridge. So flowers have meaning for us, both sentimental and actually, there is the language of flowers and what they all mean and different sentiments. I'm not going to go back into that today, but I am going to get started with the journal. So let me show you what I've got here. So this is a handmade journal that I made a year or two ago, and I just had some scrap watercolor paper that was kicking around. It was getting a little bit messed up, but it was a good quality watercolor paper, and it was nice and thick. So I folded it into a journal cover. First I painted it. I also did some heat embossing, and you can see some stamping and some embossing here. It picks up the light, and I painted with some gold paint to give it a little bit of sparkle. The binding is this, also has a beautiful decorative stamp of this trailing vine design, and that's also in gold heat embossing, so it picks up the light. On the edge here I stamped on fabric, and same kind of design, and you can see my gold zigzag stitching that I use throughout. So these journals are really fun to make. If you're interested in learning how to make a journal, please be sure to subscribe to Notes from Dandelion Cottage, because I'm going to be announcing a new workshop that will, I'm thinking, my idea is to have it be a quarterly event, so that each year, for each of the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, we create a new journal. Some of them will be for writing, some will be for watercolors or sketching. They'll, various topics that I'll go into later. But you can embellish these journals any way you like. I'm going to give you lots of ideas of how you can do it. And I will be making the announcement in Notes, which is my newsletter. It doesn't come out that often. I only send it out every now and again, so you won't be spammed. So please don't hesitate to sign up for Notes. And I also have some very fun things coming up for the summer that involve car camping and plein air painting, which I'm not going to talk about now, but I will be writing about that at length in Notes so that you can understand what I have planned. So let's get started. I'm going to open up my journal and find a place to paint. So I have, on the inside, I have pockets. So here's the back cover. I've got some extra sheets of watercolor paper ready to go. On the front inside pocket, I have my brushes and a pencil. And then I have another pocket here where I've got miscellaneous odds and ends. Here's a painting of some peonies. We've got the peonies all in bud right now, so I have a feeling that either next week or the week after we're going to be painting peonies. So if you like peonies, please stay tuned for that, because it looks like it's going to be a great season for peonies. And then I have early spring here, late winter, very early spring. Here are the daffodils and the bluebells. I still have a few of these blooming. The bluebells are going strong. I have a few late daffodils. I may come back to this page and capture some of those for now. But what I have here is this page, and on the right is a single peony. So a lot of the peonies that you may be familiar with are doubles, so they have these very fluffy petals, as you can see here. This is a single peony that blooms in the early spring, and I have these out in the garden now. We do have a lot of rain and wind going on, so I'm not sure what how they're looking at the moment, but if they're in pretty good shape, I may come back and do some of those as well. But my thought today was to take these beautiful yellow roses and to do a little border design in this corner, and then maybe put a few little forget-me-nots here and there just to give it a little extra blue color. So the first thing I want to do is protect this page. So I've got a piece of scrap paper. I'm just going to put that over my opposite page here, and actually I think what I'll do is I'll tape it down just to make sure that that stays put. And this way, if I get any drips on the going across here, the scrap paper will catch it. Okay, so that's pretty good. Grab my brushes and my pencil, and I'm going to put some paper towels here, because to make sure that you can see what I'm doing here, I'm going to go ahead and bring my palette over. So today I'm using 3 colors, just 3 colors, yellow, red, and blue, keeping it simple. And I also have a couple of water containers off to the side, and I have my sponge, and this is to help absorb excess moisture off my brush. And I've also got a handful of paper towels, so I can mop up any drips as I go. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a light pencil sketch. Now, it might be a little bit longer video today because I am going to take my time doing this. So I also have my coffee. So if you are a coffee drinker, you might want to grab a cup and settle in and watch how the picture progresses. And I see Ginger out there and Julia. Julia, my friend Julia is one of my neighbors, and she is an avid gardener as well. And I know that she's been enjoying the things that are going on in her garden. Okay, so I'm looking, I have my specimen here in front of me, and I have it arranged so that the light is coming from the upper left, and it's giving me a pretty good view of some of the shapes of these flowers. And as I said, I want to decorate the corner. So I'm going to be using my specimen as my inspiration and for reference, but I'm also going to be designing the stem to fit this area. And I got a little piece of glue on my pencil here that's bugging me. Let me get that off. All right. Okay, the other, one last thing about this rose that's very interesting, which, let me see if I can show you. The leaves are teensy tiny. They're very little leaves. They're not the big leaves that you typically see on the tea roses and the, all the other roses. Now the corner is going to be my star position, so I'm going to make sure I've got a nice big blossom here. Now if you can't see the pencil very clearly right now, don't worry, you will be able to see it in a couple of minutes once I get my overall design down on paper. I can see the center kind of peeking out from the inside of that flower. And I've got this beautiful petal. These roses are the most beautiful pale lemony yellow, and in some places they almost look white. And as I said, we've had a lot of wind and rain, so there are a couple of spots here and there where the rose petals have blown off, and just the center of the flower is left, and they're really pretty. They're kind of little starry shapes, and these tiny leaves are just gorgeous. They're precious. They're so beautiful. They almost look like a mimosa. Does anybody know what the mimosa tree looks like? If you've had any experience with a mimosa tree, put it in the comments. When I was a little girl, my grandmother had a mimosa tree on her front yard, and you could touch the leaves, and they would react by curling up as a defense mechanism. I'm not sure what animal or insect would go after them in nature, but that's what they would do, and they were just endlessly fascinating to me. As a kid, I would just be playing with them constantly when we went to visit. I'm going to see if I can zoom you in a little bit to help you see what I'm doing. Not a lot of room here, so let's shift this over a little bit. Maybe that will help. And I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to add a couple more flowers. So I'll put one over here. And as I mentioned, this watercolor sketchbook is kind of an ongoing project. And so I pull it out periodically when I've got something wonderful blooming in the garden. And typically, because the videos that I present here on the social media channels last for about anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and a half, let's say, I don't always finish the entire 2-page spread, or whatever the case may be. And so I've been coming back to the previous season or the previous year's renderings and adding to them, and it's really been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying watching the sketchbook develop. So that's another good reason to have a sketchbook handy is to, even when you don't have a lot of time to finish a complete picture, get something down. Get your, when in my school we had a motto at the Art Students League of New York, and it was never a day without a line. And so if you keep your sketchbooks handy, you can have one that you can pop in a bag and bring with you when you're out and about, or if you are hanging out on the deck or in a coffee shop, whatever the case may be, you'll have a few minutes that you can spend sketching people or flowers or birds, whatever you like. So I really like the way this is looking so far. I'm going to put a little trailing part over here. And then after I've got the roses designed, I will add the forget-me-nots here and there to fill in some of the additional spaces. So let's get one more up here. Some more of these leaves. And also some leaves over here. Okay, I think that's enough for now, just to get started. So I'm going to start with my brush that's slightly larger, and I'm just going to mix up some very, very, very pale yellow and get these started. And I'm leaving some areas where the paper doesn't have any paint on it for some of the light areas, but you can see how very light I'm going to paint just to get things started. So this is just enough to sort of help me map out the color placement, where the design is, and I'm working on all of the picture at once. I'm not just staying in one area, just moving around. And that's a little bud. The buds are a little bit brighter yellow than the flowers. And then the those spots where the petals have blown away are kind of a golden color. So let me take some of my yellow, and I'm letting a little bit of the red get in there, so I have a slightly darker color. I'm going to add another one. maybe right here. And then the sepals that are left behind sort of spread out from that center. So I'm just going to let that all run together in a beautiful little star shape. So that's my first wash, very, very light. And now what I can do is begin to add a little more color to what I've got there. And one thing I want to establish is the center of the flowers. So I can look inside there and I can see where these little orangey reddish areas are. Add a little more paint to those spots. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in not too much water there. So no worries, if you get too wet a spot, just take your damp brush and mop it up and you'll be good to go. I want a softer edge on some of these shadowy areas. Need a sip of coffee. If you're watching on Facebook, there is a button up in the banner. It says sign up, and that will take you directly to the form for notes. And you'll be able to see the classes that I have coming up, the journal making workshops, and some of the plans that I have for the summer, which I'm really excited about. So stay tuned for that. Anybody out there like to go camping? Let me know in the comments if you're somebody who likes to go camping or used to do a lot of camping when you were younger. When I was younger, I did a lot of camping and I love it. And I've kind of gotten away from it as you know, I had more things to do around here at Dandelion Cottage, and you know, now I live in this beautiful place that I hardly ever want to leave. However, that's about to change because I do have some fun trips coming up that I'm planning, and I'm going to be moving around a little bit. So as I announce the areas that I'll be going, if you're somebody that lives nearby, you might want to come and meet me and do a little painting with me. That's what I'm hoping. So you can learn more about that in notes from Dandelion Cottage. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find the link in the description below the video. And if you're on Facebook, you can just hit that sign up button, or you can visit my website at dandelioncottagedesign.com, and you will have instructions there on how you can go about doing that. And also there's a whole lot more information on there. All right, so my little corner decoration here is coming along, and it's still looking very sketchy, and that's fine. I'm going to add some of the shadow areas on the inside of my roses. So for that, I'm going to be mixing my yellow with a tiny bit of violet. So if you mix your red and your blue together, you're going to get a violet, and I'm looking for a kind of a blue violet, so a cooler violet. And if I just take the tiniest bit of that and mix that into my yellow, it's going to give me a kind of a grayed color that is going to work beautifully for the shadow areas. So I'm going to grab some of that now and get that in the inside of my flowers. And I'm painting, and because the flowers are so pale, the shadows are very, very pale. So you want to do this very lightly. And I will give you a close-up in just a minute so you can see what that looks like. And I'm also using the tip of my brush to do a little bit of drawing, so I can note where the petals come together, how they curl under. Alright, and then I'm going to switch to my little brush, and I'm going to put some of the detail on those little starry places. And I can make those a little bit richer. So I'm adding a stronger mix of my yellow to get some extra color in my centers. I don't want them to be too pale. And let's see if I can get a little bit closer for you. There you go. I'm going to take some of that shadow mixture with the violet and just add a couple of slightly darker areas while it's still damp, and just let that kind of blend with the surrounding area. And I don't want to neglect my leaves, so I'm going back into my green, and I'm getting a kind of a medium strong tone and mixture. I'm just going to pick out some of these leaves. Now I can use my brush on my paper towel to absorb some of the excess paint and moisture, and that's going to help me to get that little hair off of there. That's going to help me to control the paint a little bit better. So I can get that started, and then with a damp brush I can just soften that edge and get a beautiful gradation. All right, and you don't have to do this on every single leaf. You just want to pick out a few. And if I look very closely at these little rose leaves, they do indeed have that tiny serrated edge, so I can just sort of indicate that with some little dash marks. Okay. And I want to get the stem. Now the stems are very interesting because the stems have some red in them. So if I take my green and I mix a little red in there, it's going to give me a kind of a dull greenish red. And I can use that just to add another color note to increase the harmony here, my red, yellow, and blue harmony. So I can just do that here and there. I'm going to go back to my medium green mixture and just give these leaves a little more attention. Okay, so they're starting to shape up, starting to give the impression of a beautiful leafy border. Now, one of the things that I do want to do is, because these roses are so pale, I don't want them to get lost on the paper. So I am going to add a little bit of a tone in some of the shadow areas, and I'm just going to soften that to let that blend, and that's just going to help to develop some of the areas where the petals are in shadow, but without bringing too much attention to those areas, just enough to give it a little bit of form, and so that you understand where what the flower shape is. Just here and there. Now, if the other way you can capture an edge to the flowers by adding a tonal wash to the background, but for this picture I don't want to do that. I want to keep the paper white because I have other plans for this sketchbook in the future. All right, so there are a few areas on the roses where I want to go back now with the pure yellow and just bring that color out. So these areas are going to be not the shadow areas and not the highlight areas, but the middle tones. So, and I don't want to make it even all around. So I'm going to be very selective about where this brighter color is going to go. And that's just going to infuse a little more life into the design. And I can always go back. Now remember, your watercolor will dry a little bit lighter than what it looks when it's wet. So you may want to, when you're finished painting, just put it aside for a little while and then come back to it later and see if there's any little touching up that you may want to do to liven it back up again. So I'm pretty happy with that. I do, now that it's had a chance to dry a little bit, I'm going to go back into my centers, this time with the darker, kind of a scarlet, sort of an orangey scarlet color. Well, it's still a little bit damp, so that might be something that I come back to later when it has a chance to dry. But I can get it started. So there we go. Okay, so that's a pretty good indication of the overall design and color palette. Now what I want to do, just want to get a little more yellow on this petal here, is I want to now bring in my forget-me-nots. Did you forget about the forget-me-nots? I didn't forget about the forget-me-nots. Now these are so teensy tiny, and they're so beautiful. I'm not going to knock myself out and try to paint every little detail. I'm just going to indicate, okay? Don't state, indicate. And since my palette is getting a little bit messy, I'm just going to wipe a spot clean near my blue, because these blue flowers are so very, very vivid that I just want to get a pure blue. And I'm using a very, very watered down version, clean water. And I'm just going to place, let's see, I'm going to put them here and there. So let's start up in this corner. Now if you look at the forget-me-nots, they have 5 petals. And when you're painting flowers, it's very important to count your petals, because that is what helps people to identify what particular flower it is that you're looking at. And I'm going to leave the center of the forget-me-not blank for now, and then I'll come back in when the blue has a minute to dry and I'll get that little yellow center. And what I want to do here is I want to make sure I get some of these tiny flowers going away in perspective. So I want to get kind of a 3/4 view. And in this case, I'm sort of going around the edge of this rose petal, and that's helping to define where that petal begins. Okay, so basically it's just, you know, some little dots. I'm paying attention to the flowers that I'm looking at, but I'm not copying each and every one of them. And I'm just going to pop these in wherever I think a splash of blue would be nice. I see Cheryl out there. Hi Cheryl, you're back from your travels. Looks like you had a wonderful trip. What do you have planned for the summer? All right, just a couple more. All right. So let me move this back a little bit. Now, these forget-me-nots, I don't know if you can see, but down near the bottom, you can see these leaves. So I think what I want to do is see if I can add a couple of the forget-me-not shaped leaves here and there just to give it a little extra diversity. So back to the medium, sort of light actually, light green mixture. I'll just make a little basic forget-me-not leaf shape here and there, and this is just to help the design move across the page. Maybe we'll tuck one right down here. It's the tip. Okay, and then I can take my slightly stronger green mixture and I can just drop that in there, and that'll flood because they're still moist. It'll just flood through and do the blending all by itself. Okay? All right, so that is my basic design. Let me zoom you out a little bit so you can see it better. There we go, and I'll move the paints. Now there are a few little odds and ends and details that I may want to add to this once it's dry. But I think you can get the idea of how that page is starting to look. And as I look at the full spread, I'm thinking maybe to add something down here just to balance it out, sort of pull it all together. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that gave you some ideas. I'm purposely leaving areas of the paper open that could be used for journaling, and I just want to continue adding to the journal with all of the magnificent flowers and maybe a few bugs and some birds and things like that. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope to see you again tomorrow for Paper Crafting Thursday. I have a fun project coming up that is going to be designed especially for somebody who loves dancing. and so I'm kind of excited to do that. So I hope I see you here tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. I'm usually here at 12 noon. Today came on a little bit later because the lawnmowers were here and I wasn't able to run the video with all the noise. So that's what the delay was all about. But in the meantime, stay well, stay happy, stay creative, and I will see you next time. Thanks for coming.